I'm talking about a pylon. I'm talking about a pylon that's largely led by the media on false information. I'm talking about a pylon that has been largely led by men on X, which gets my back up. I know men can actually suffer from breast cancer too, but it does annoy me because they're sort of really mouthing off, and often their comments are the most vicious. Hey, and thanks for joining me. On the last Gossip Before Bed, I said that I was quite keen to do a review of Elle Macpherson's book, Elle. And it's because I was enjoying it. I was reading it. It had so much interesting detail about the early 90s supermodel days and a bit of juicy showbiz gossip, and also some really moving parts about when she got sober, the birth of her children, her various relationships. It's a fascinating book. It really, really is. Well, no sooner had I recorded that and put that up than all hell broke loose around this book. And there was a huge pile on Elle on social media. And I was a bit bemused and a bit befuddled because, like I said, I'd read the book and I couldn't really understand where all this anger and angst and pile on was coming from. Because after reading her book, I thought she actually dealt with the whole subject really responsibly. And after reading the book, I felt that she didn't advocate for anybody else to follow her plan or the moves she made or the decisions she made in any way regarding her breast cancer journey. She merely was telling about her path, her journey. So I was getting increasingly sort of uncomfortable. Then I started to get a little bit angry. Then I got a real sense of injustice. And I started answering these sort of awful posts on X, a lot of them from medical professionals that really should know better. And I will be sharing some of that with you. I'm not going to share all of it with you because I don't want to sort of drag us down into the mud. But I think it's a really interesting issue. And I am going to just review the book as a normal book review, but I think I have to address this first because it's all over the news. Now, disclaimer, before I show you what I've found and show you what I've got to say, and I'd be really interested in your comments down below, I have to say the measured response to this story I have found on this channel. I have people reach out to me and say, I'm sorry, Shauna, I can't agree with you on this one, and they've told me why. And I totally respect that view. I'm not sitting on the fence. They had valid points to make. But what I'm talking about isn't people disagreeing and having valid points to make, and people with their own personal life experience reaching out and sharing valid, opinions. I'm talking about a pile-on. I'm talking about a pile-on that's largely led by the media on false information. I'm talking about a pile-on that has been largely led by men on X, which gets my back up. I know men can actually suffer from breast cancer too, but it does annoy me because they're sort of really mouthing off. And often their comments are the most vicious. And again, from professional people that should know better, indeed medical professionals that should know better. Also, the other thing that worried me was that a lot of these newspaper reports are actually false. They claim that at the time of Elle making these decisions that she was dating Andrew Wakefield. Now, I'm not going to spell out the controversies surrounding that man because I probably would get this video being taken down. But during the pandemic, he was a highly controversial figure. You just have to Google him to find out why. Very controversial, and so that got a lot of people sort of outraged and their back up because they were thinking Elle was going out with this controversial figure and that's why she made the choices that she made and she's anti-medical establishment and all this sort of thing. Well, she wasn't. She wasn't going out with him. She was married to a Miami real estate mogul at the time called Jeffrey Soffer, and she just wasn't. That happened years later. So at the time of her making these decisions, no, she wasn't involved with that controversial figure. And since I've noticed, The Guardian has had to do a correction. The Sunday Times has had to do a correction. But that didn't make all the people putting out this awful pile on stuff, they didn't correct it. They still made their accusations and just let them sit there. And the awful thing is, they weren't only saying these vicious things, they were trying to raise the rabble. They were trying to get people going. They were trying to incite a pile-on, and all under this guise of caring for other women. So let's get into this, but I do want to just give you a few quick facts. Like I said, Elle did not recommend this path of treatment for any other woman. Secondly, she was under the care of medical professionals at the time of her diagnosis and after that diagnosis. She had a lumpectomy, and she says she has a lumpectomy in her book. A lot of people criticising her as saying, oh, you know, she's this supermodel princess. One called her an overrated influencer. And that was actually shared by an ex-female MP of the Australian Parliament, which just disgusted me. I won't name her because I don't want to start another pile-on. But, you know, it's really out of line because she wrote about the lumpectomies in her book in detail. Now, when the margins of that lumpectomy were found to be not clear, at that point she went in for a second one with a surgeon, you know, a treating breast cancer specialist, and she had a second lumpectomy to ensure that the margins were clear, to then buy her time, to then look at her options. Now, if that's not responsible, I don't know what is. Having said that, if it ever happened to me, and touch wood, it doesn't, but look, you know, who knows what's going to happen down the track, I would probably take the conventional path. I am a conventional medical path sort of girl. I've never really kicked the system. I mean, certainly our parents were actually brought up to respect doctors as if they were gods. And I think some doctors want that still now, particularly ones that are on X. But, you know, we can advocate for ourselves. We can ask questions. We can delve. But even after all that, I would probably take the conventional path because probably I wouldn't have access to anything else. And the conventional path is probably the best option for most of us. But the point is, most of us can make our own decisions. Most of us are intelligent enough to not be swayed by anyone when it comes to choices about our body or medical treatment for our body or options of care for our body. Most of us can make up our own mind. We don't really need sort of little nannies all over the internet caring for us and steering us in the right way. Now, one of the doctors that got my backup on X was Dr. David Robert Grimes. Now, he did not get my backup because I didn't think he was qualified to have an opinion. He is very qualified to have an opinion. He's actually a breast cancer researcher, and he's written quite a few books. One's The Irrational Ape and also Good Thinking, which is all about critical thinking, ascertaining the facts, not being swayed emotionally, you know, basing your arguments on objective fact, not, you know, woo-woo stuff. So fair enough. But it was the way he made his point that I thought was unprofessional and out of line. So I'm going to put it up for you on the screen and I'll read it out for you for those of you that need glasses like me and can't read it. Incredibly irresponsible for Elle Macpherson. Holistic therapy is not a valid treatment for breast cancer. Now, this is where I think he sort of lets himself down for someone that's written books on critical thinking and basing their argument on objective fact, because he just quite frankly gets really bitchy at this point. So entitled that a multimillionaire with access to best healthcare advises women to ignore medical advice. Ample evidence this bullshit kills people. Well, facts, doctor. She did not advise women to ignore medical advice. She received medical treatment in the form of 2 lumpectomies, and she ensured the margins were clear, whereupon she made a choice about her own body. Then, ample evidence this bullshit kills people. What bullshit? What bullshit? Her telling her story and her choices in a memoir 7 plus years after the event. That bullshit, doctor? The Guardian, really inaccurate report. You know, look, what they did, I think, was they looked at the Women's Weekly sort of interview, and then they based their articles off the interview and the Australian Women's Weekly sort of interpretation of the book and the little snippets that they shared, and then based all their arguments on a completely false premise. which is infuriating. I keep saying, where are the journalists? And you would think people at The Guardian, people at the Sunday Times, these aren't tabloids. These are respected broadsheets. Do your bloody research, because what you've done is create a pile-on someone for no good reason, not based on the facts. But then David Robert Grimes doubles down, and I'll put it up for you on the screen. Again, more emotion, more bitchiness. Callum is shocked that Elle McPherson, who's selling a book, runs a wellness company. Well, heads up, Dr. David Robert Grimes. Wellco started in 2014. 2014. It's been running for 10 years. 7 years ago, Elle was diagnosed with breast cancer. If she was trying to cash in on this diagnosis, why did she keep it completely silent and private for 7 years? She's had her wellness company for 10 years. She's had the diagnosis for 7 years. So according to your thinking, she's lost 7 years of marketing for her wellness company that she could trade off the back of her breast cancer diagnosis. It is an awful, awful accusation to make, and it is not based on anything factual. I will go on. And this is the real reason all the medical professionals are piling on her. And dated I'll put up down the bottom of this video, anti-what? Ghoul Andrew Wakefield, long after his grift was exposed, would mislead the public over her actual treatment to give cranks the credit for what medical science did. She did not mislead the public. If you bothered to read her book, her memoir, she gives full, affectionate, total credit to all the medical professionals that treated her. She was very clear that the cancer was removed and the margins were clear with the lumpectomies. She was very clear that she consulted a board-certified medical practitioner for the advice going forward. She had advice to have a double mastectomy, chemotherapy, radiology, treatment that would have lasted almost 2 years. So she decided to try and get the margins clear with lumpectomies to buy her a little bit of time, whereupon she consulted a friend of hers, knew a medical professional who was a board-certified cardiologist that had gone into cancer care, and she spoke to this board-certified medical professional about her ongoing options. So that is just inaccurate. It is not based on objective fact. And like I said, for someone that wrote a book called Good Bloody Thinking, oh my goodness me. So like I said, the article in the Guardian Sunday Times was amended to say that she was not dating Andrew Wakefield at the time. She was married at the time. And for the first 6 months after her diagnosis, she was still married to Jeffrey. And then they did break up. But it was a year and a half or so later that she actually just briefly dated Andrew Wakefield. But let's all pile on her for that. So now we get on to Mike Carlton. I'll put up this tweet. Now, this was so offensive, it sent me into a rage. Now, for those of you that don't know, Mike Carlton is a known sort of advocate, political advocate, an advocate on a lot of issues. He's a writer, he's a journalist. He's a hard-nosed journalist with lots of experience. He was on a lot of very credible, hard-hitting news shows in the day, and a lot of people respect him very much. And I just found this tweet just so unprofessional and just so, again, bitchy, unnecessarily bitchy. Excellent to have Elle McPherson's learned views on breast cancer. I'd also like to hear what she can tell us about Middle East peace, inflationary pressures in the economy, climate change. I won't go on. Do I need to go on? So anyway. Now, she tells us in the book about how when she first found out, she felt the need, of course, to reach out to her then husband, and he was out of town, and she didn't really want to tell him over the phone, but eventually, he got it out of her. They were having marriage difficulties at the time, but they were still together. Jeff launched a barrage of questions. How did I know? What did the doctor say? Was it confirmed? Had she told the boys? All that sort of thing. I'm paraphrasing. This is a direct quote. I couldn't answer all these questions. I didn't have the answers there and then. All I knew was the next step was to go for a lumpectomy. Medical treatment. Medical professional, medical specialist, top surgeon. That's what she did. This is another direct quote. I waited on the results, which seemed to take forever. Now, I'm probably going to get the pronunciation of this diagnosis wrong, but I'll give it a go. When Dr. P finally called, she told me the diagnosis was HER2, positive estrogen receptive intraductal carcinoma. I hope that's okay. She suggested that I should undergo a mastectomy with radiation, chemotherapy, hormone therapy, plus reconstruction of my breast. She concluded that the whole process would probably take about 2 years from start to finish, maybe. Now that's a lot to take on, isn't it? So she went in, like I said, for the lumpectomy and then back again to make sure the margins were clear. So a bridging plan was sort of created for her. That bridging plan also included holistic sort of measures, organic food and trying to, obviously, look, anyone I know, any people that I love that have been on a cancer journey, the first thing they do is improve their diet and try to be as healthy as they can going into the surgery, going into the treatment, because then they won't be hit quite so hard if they can get as healthy as they can prior to all that happening. I don't think that's unreasonable or wacky or silly. I think it's sensible, don't you? Now, this is where she's referred to another medical professional, which gave her the option to think twice about the radiology and the chemotherapy. My life-saving intuitive friend Gabby, who herself worked in the healing field, so obviously her friend Gabby was in the natural healing field, but she didn't refer her to a natural healer. She referred her to a medical professional. Listen. She suggested I talk with Dr. C in Dallas. She said he was a brilliant, triple board certified cardiologist who had transitioned into cancer care and that he was a genius. So a friend that she trusted referred her to a medical professional. He specialized in medical and alternative treatments for Lyme disease and cancer. There are a lot of doctors out there now that treat medically, pharmaceutically, and also supplement that with holistic measures, trying to create the perfect balance for their patients. Again, accepted practice. And if you can afford it, great. I think a lot of this resentment on Elle is actually the fact that she could afford these measures, that she could afford to fly off to Dallas and see this man, and she could afford to sort of buy herself some time and for rest and, recuperating. And that's what a lot of this sort of pile-on seems to also be generated from. Envy against another woman that has suffered breast cancer and again has done nothing wrong, has not encouraged any other woman to follow her path. Now, a lot of people, like I said, the reasonable people that disagreed with me that I respect and their opinions that contacted me, often they were breast cancer survivors themselves, and they said, look, Shauna, I can't agree with you on this one because the fact that she owns a wellness company means that she will influence some people. But honestly, if the book had been accurately reported, I'd take that on board and I accept that that's a point. But if it had been accurately reported in the first instance, then you would see that she is not advocating for other women to follow her path. And she doesn't even mention her company in relation to any of this holistic measures. She honestly doesn't. And I also take objection to the fact that it's like women sort of run in a pack and that they're unduly influenced by supermodels and actresses and influencers and that they can't think for themselves. And that, oh, well, Elle Macpherson did it, so I will refuse chemotherapy and radiology. I mean, come on. Would they accuse men of being unduly influenced by a man that took that option? Would anyone be piling on the internet if a man chose this path to have responsible surgery to make sure their margins were clear, but then chose not to have chemotherapy or radiology, which is her bloody right? Would anyone pile on that man and say, well, we're just worried about men being unduly influenced by that man? Would they? Would they? Now, this is a direct quote, and this is sort of my definitive argument. Direct quote from her book. I'm not suggesting this choice is for everyone. I believe that whatever choice anyone makes in any situation, it's imperative that it is aligned with their deepest truth. Now, their deepest truth could be an unwavering, unshakable belief in conventional medicine, which most of the population have. So that's not going to be swayed by one person with their own choice. And they must believe in it and persist with it. So she's saying, if you choose a medical path, believe in it, persist with it. Go you do you. That is a valid choice. She's also saying you can do half in, half out like she did, where she had surgery, which is not a holistic choice. And she had surgery twice. And she consulted medical professionals, top of their field, and were under their care. But she also pursued holistic ways rather than bombarding it with chemotherapy and radiology. And it was because this triple board certified medical professional told her that there are no guarantees. And I think any specialist worth their salt will tell you there are no guarantees when it comes to it coming back. Now, a lot of medical professionals believe bombard it. And I think, like I said, if it was me, I'd be wanting to throw, napalm at it. I would be wanting to just blast it out of existence because I'm a conventional medical sort of gal. But I don't expect everyone to agree with me, and I expect every woman to make their own choices. Now, new scientists weighed in, and the first part of their article was really factual, and I thought, at last, someone dealing with objective fact. They were not piling on Elle Macpherson, and so it was okay. But then they too went into emotion, attack, and pile on at the end of their article. With an estimated net worth of US 95 million, she can afford to seek multiple second opinions, then turn down chemotherapy. Her wealth acts as a safety net. Well, actually, no, it doesn't, because she made the brave choice for her, and it could have gone terribly wrong. It could still go terribly wrong. When it comes to health, wealth does not protect you. She made a choice. She's prepared to live by that choice. She's not advocating anyone else makes that choice. And like I said, if she really wanted everyone to follow her path and buy up on her wellness products, which none of them are even referred to in relation to this story, wouldn't she have made that move 7 years ago? The only reason this has come out is because she's written her memoir. This is one chapter in the book, and the rest of the book is all about her life and all of her amazing experiences, and that's what I'm going to share right now. So like I said, I really enjoyed this book because she goes right back to the beginning, where she was just a normal Aussie girl, and she was starting to get approached, starting to get noticed by huge sort of global model companies and agencies, and she knocked one back, and she went with this smaller agency, and she ended up going over to New York. Well, when she did that step, she actually ended up living in a one-bedroom apartment in New York with one of the agency's sort of CEOs. They even shared a bed. And for a long time, she just had to work her butt off trying to pay them back for the airfare and for the visa, the working visa, and all the other expenses that they covered for her to come over. And it took quite a while for her to clear all that debt. And eventually she did, and eventually she started to get more and more successful. There's lovely stories, like I told you in Gossip Before Bed, when she went to St. Bart's for a photo shoot, and the photographer actually really hated her and wanted to get her off the job, and she met Billy Joel and Christy Brinkley, and And she says, she admits that she wasn't overly professional back then. She was a bit of a party girl, and she got a telling off by the head of the agency. And so she decided from that point that she was going to be professional. Her perfectionism kicked in. And as you read this book, you can see she is a perfectionist. She really cares about everything. Even the story about when she got her first Sports Illustrated front cover. A lot of models in those days would just sort of turn up the day before the shoot, usually on a Caribbean island, and they would just turn up. And they would often be exhausted and pale and, worked right up to the point. But Elle used to go off and take herself off for 3 or 4 days beforehand, get a tan, eat really healthy food, only drink water, make sure she was tip-top. Now, the first time she went for it, she didn't get it. She didn't get it. But the second time, she did get it. And from that point, it's really where her career started taking off. Now, Elle was really different from a lot of supermodels because a lot of supermodels were known to be catwalk models, or were known to do sort of product endorsement and ads, or were known to sort of deal in one sort of specific area of the industry, makeup, for example. But Elle did everything. She did everything. She never knocked back a job. So she did ads, she did appearances, she even hosted Saturday Night Live. I mean, in the 90s, when her career took off as a supermodel, because she did everything and was constantly working, she had a really good work ethic. She wouldn't knock back anything. I mean, if she got a call from Saturday Night Live because another guest had pulled out, she'd be there. She'd be there. And she'd do a really professional job. And she started to get noticed, so she got a few movies. Of course, she did Sirens with Hugh Grant, and she also did, I didn't even remember this, but she did The Mirror Has Two Faces, Barbra Streisand's movie. I even forgot she was in that. It was just quite a small part, I think. I think she was just the beautiful girlfriend. But yeah, fascinating. So a stellar career all through the 90s, and she also had great loves. She was actually married to Jules Ben-Simon, who was a top photographer and actually helped create Elle magazine. And he was quite considerably older than her. It was very much sort of a Pygmalion type relationship. She actually says about it in the book, how he taught her basically everything. He made her more sophisticated. He took her from just a simple, quite brash Aussie girl to someone who was a little more international and sophisticated. This is a quote. "I began to dress like a French girl and I appreciated French things, but I wasn't complicated. I was still an authentic Aussie, kind of in-your-face, brash girl." And I loved being with Jules. It was like an education, a Pygmalion story to some extent. He taught me how to be a really excellent model, and that meant everything to me. He taught me art and music, literature and French. Now, it's very sad how her marriage with Jules Ben-Simon actually broke off. I'm just going to read how she found out. She was 25, right? "One day, I noticed a model had the same dolphin tattoo on her ankle as Jules had on his arm. I didn't need to know anymore, really. I called him and asked, 'Do you love her?' He said, 'Yes.' I asked him, 'Are you in love with her?' He said, 'Yes.' The pain was excruciating, and I burned my wedding dress." She actually burnt it in the designer, beautiful couture sort of wedding dress. She burnt it in the bathtub. Now, after that, she went into a footloose, fancy-free phase. She was actually dating Tim Jeffries, who was a very well-known sort of model. And I think he actually had some other sort of job in finance or something, but I think he also did a bit of modelling. But, they had all the nightclub life, the nightclubs of Saint-Tropez. They hung out with George Michael at his place, and George would sing and play his latest albums. We were with Robbie Williams the night he was thrown out of Take That for being a bad boy. One night I went to a party and found myself chatting about life and music with Princess Diana as she sat cross-legged on the floor. We talked about music she loved, and she was just another girl in a pair of high-waisted jeans and t-shirt, having fun and socialising. So there's lots of little sort of side notes like that. And I think if you get this book, you will really enjoy it. Like I said, the controversial sort of topic is one chapter out of a stellar book. Now, one of the most moving parts, and like I said, her description of her career through the 1990s, wow, that's a read in itself. But in 2003, after the birth of her second son, she decided to get sober. Now, when you read how she used to drink, you would actually think that, it could easily be just any one of your friends. She did drink daily, but it would be 1 or 2 drinks. But it did escalate, and she was conscious of the fact, because she was a mum, and she was actually with Archie Busson then. It's either Busson or Busson. I looked it up and Google said it was Busson. She didn't marry Archie, but she had 2 sons with him, and they had a very close, really good relationship for 10 years. But just after the birth of her second son, she decided, no, I want to go sober, because he was away a lot, he was working a lot, and she was finding that she was having a vodka home alone, and she would always wait until she'd put her sons to bed and things like that. But she just knew that it was escalating. She knew that she was feeling like she needed it, so she just wanted to stop it in her tracks. But she says, I never got messy, I never missed appointments, I had a perfectly scheduled life, the boys were well cared for, everything in their home was perfect. Like, to look at her from the outside in, she was perfect, doing nothing wrong. Now, this caused a lot of stress for her, because she went into rehab, and in the last week of rehab, her whole family came over from Australia, her mother and father and her sister, and they did sort of family therapy for a week, which that's a loving family, isn't it? And she says actually later in life that her father and mother said that was one of the best things they ever did. Although it was extremely hard at the time, they said it was one of the best things they ever did. And I know that she's very close to her sibling, to her sister. So the thing that it caused, though, was a lot of division between her and Archie, because Archie loved to drink, he loved to party. He was by no means an alcoholic, he didn't have a problem, but he was just a normal social drinker. But he wanted to keep on drinking. And while she was in rehab, one of the counsellors actually said to him, she'll find it a lot easier to quit if you quit. And he said, well, it's her choice, her decision, like, I don't want to quit. And so after about 2 years after getting out of rehab, she actually says that their relationship did suffer and did fall apart. She says about coming home to London from rehab, it was daunting. I wasn't sure how to live life sober with my family and friends. I wasn't sure how to integrate that sobriety into my life. I certainly didn't know it would create quite so much dissonance in my relationship with Archie. She said they hobbled on for another 2 more years. One morning we woke up and he said to me, it's over, isn't it? It was that simple. Now, they went on to co-parent. There were some troubles when she sort of hooked up with Jeffrey Sofa and married Jeffrey Sofa, who was the Miami real estate tycoon many, many years later. It caused a bit of division because she wanted to actually move to the USA and be with Jeffrey. And of course, the boys at that stage were living in London where their father was. But ultimately, he did give permission, and he showed her enormous love and support around the time of her cancer diagnosis. So I hope I've given you a taste of the book. It's interesting to read about how she started Wellco. It's interesting to read about how she started her intimates lingerie collection. She's a very astute and smart businesswoman, but she doesn't strike me as someone that's insincere. She doesn't strike me as someone who's out to hurt anyone or to use anyone. Now, I don't know whether I'm sticking up for her because she's an Aussie girl. Maybe I am. But I couldn't see anything in this book that I didn't admire. A lot of her choices in life aren't my choices. We're extremely different people. But I can still respect her choices and her decisions. So I hope that you've found that interesting. I would recommend this book. It's very well written. I enjoyed it. Like I said, it's got so many insights, into that sort of 90s party scene. And it also gave me a really valuable insight to just how hard working supermodels are. And that's why I thought it increasingly sort of angry, really, that people were dismissing her on social media as an overrated influencer. She is way more than that. And she has achieved way more than the people that are actually criticizing her, I have noticed. Now, Elle Macpherson is actually going to appear on 60 Minutes Australia, I believe, tonight. So I cannot tell you what she is going to say in that interview. I am basing my defense of her position and her right to choose her own path of treatment based on her book, based on what I have read in her book. If she makes irresponsible sort of statements tonight on 60 Minutes, I'm sorry. Then I can't sort of foresee that. I don't know why she would, but if she does, that could change my opinion, because I hope she is as responsible in that interview as she was in this book. And on the basis of this book, she shouldn't have got the pile on. She did. Let me know what you think down below. Loved you all, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.